Hello, everybody. Wasn't a short countdown, Mark. It was the same 30 seconds as always. I apologize for that little bit of echo. This program I use to stream updated, and it has an all-system audio feature added. And in my various presets I've created, it is not muted yet. So as I go through this, as I change from scene to scene, but all the behind-the-scenes technical stuff you guys aren't aware of, don't need to be aware of. Anyway, as I change from transition to transition, I'll probably have to mute that all-system audio, and hopefully I'll remember to do that. Yay for upgrades, which I discovered about 30 minutes ago, but I thought that it was global. It's not global, it's per scene. Anyway, thank you for joining me, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. I appreciate the views this week. I've certainly had a dry spell there where I wasn't getting any content up because the bathroom ate my life for a while, and the bathroom renovation. Not any bathroom, or not any inciting incident for those unfamiliar with the renovations going on around here. But it's nice to be back in the swing of things and have some videos out, and to have the interaction with you guys and the seemingly very positive response to those videos. It's very rewarding, so thank you. It doesn't hurt when you're being sent 65 Twins and 65 and 69 Princetons, and I've got a 66 AC30 coming to the channel this week, and various super reverbs. I've got a 72 here on the bench right now. Just, in my own quiet way, making the world a louder place, 1 amp at a time. Happy Robert Burns night, exactly, Martin. I'll have the tatties. You can have the neeps and haggis. I've had haggis, and that I don't think I have the stomach for it. All right, let's see. Let's get to some questions. Remember, as you come in, please only ask any one question the one time. If you put some question marks before the questions, helps me see them in the chat. You can ask more than one question, but only one instance of each question for me. Thanks. So initially, the first stuff on my screen here is not in complete order as to when it was asked, but soon I get caught up. So I'm going to start with Davey K's here. Hey, Davey. He notices I prefer using 100 ohm heater resistors rather than a center tap when available. Is there a value in one way versus the other? Well, there are two advantages to using 100 ohm screen resistors, or they can use 47 ohm, 220 ohm, as long as they're balanced. First of all, a transformer is much like a guitar pickup. You have a certain number of winds on one side, let's just say on one side, and a certain number of winds on the other side. And it's very rare for them to have the exact same number of winds and to have the exact DC resistance per side between each heater wire and the center tap wire, the physical wire. So it's very difficult to wind a transformer to be balanced. If you remove that center tap and create an artificial center tap, it's very easy to use 1% or even just 5% tolerance resistors, so you can get it exactly dialed out. Most of the time, you want them to be matched. Sometimes an imbalance is necessary. And you can control that with resistors. You can't control that with the physical center tap. The second advantage of using resistors is that if you have a short in your heater supply, and I've seen this happen to some very old vintage valuable amps, in the split second you have that heater short, before the mains fuse can blow, you can actually have the center tap char, or the heater wires char, and they will char like that, and that charring, that burning, will go up along the wire and sometimes down into the power transformer. So you cannot snip off the burnt end of the wire and splice on new wire. The entire secondary inside the transformer is burned, and then you either have to replace the entire transformer, or you have to have it rewound if it's a rare example. Those are very expensive things. The resistors I use, 1% tolerance metal films that are flame-proof. They're like 20 cents each. So would you rather spend 40 cents if you have a catastrophic failure, or $200 to $500 or up? So let's see. Thanks, Jim Mass. Appreciate that. With your Pro Reverb Ultra Linear, the hum balance oscillates unless it's at far right or left, damaged pot or something else. That's an odd problem to have, but I don't trust hum balance pots, heater balance pots. They are typically a half-watt pot or a third-watt pot used on a heater supply, and a heater balance resistor is usually half-watt, so you get a total of 1 watt there. And so the pots just aren't up to the task, and they often burn. It's very common on 70s Fenders which had the hum balance pot mounted over here, or some Twins have it over by the power transformer. They fail. They burn. The reissue has the same damn thing, and the reissue Twin, that pot burns. You can either replace that little half-watt pot with a very expensive custom-ordered 2-watt pot from PEC, or you can just say, well, that was a bad idea. Let's just remove all that and put in 200 ohm resistors. Try the resistors because they're inexpensive, and anything below, say, 300 ohms will work. So typically I use 100. You can use 47, 220, whatever you want to use. That's probably going to solve your problems. You probably have an issue with the pot. If not, you've got something else really crazy, but oscillating, that's a new symptom for me. Hey, Sun Zubin, just finished putting alarm bar in the AC32X. Great. What are the implications of reducing the send level to the effects loop and increasing the return level? The send is too hot for my pedals. Well, there are two approaches to this. Number one, you could get a very high quality external loop that would, you would plug into the existing loop, which would give you a adjustable send level and return gain, makeup gain, and you'd want to have a very low impedance send, and you want to turn down the send level so your pedals aren't clipping, and then you have to make up the gain so that, you're back to where you would have been without the pedals. But that makeup gain, you've got to do that quietly, and that's difficult to do. A lot of loops don't do that. Or you can use pedals which can accept the line level coming out. That's going to be not pro level. It's not going to be +4, but it's going to be line level, which is -10 nominally versus the -30 nominal signal that guitar pedals are used for. Because pedals designed to accept the signal from an instrument don't have to deal with those levels. Now, a lot of new pedals can handle either, like the Strymon stuff can, a lot of Boss stuff can. So I don't know what pedals you're using. Some pedals, you can calibrate them, or there's a switch for that. It would be better in general for you to either buy a very high quality external loop kind of thing, maybe the Fryette stuff, which is expensive but good, or just to upgrade the pedals, and then you can use them with any amp. And most of the stuff today that can handle line level can also handle instrument. So, but if you're using some older pedal, if you're using like a Boss Chorus from the 80s in that effects loop, it's going to go. Hey, Holger DAG, he can't get rid of tremolo ticking in a 70s deluxe reverb. Lead dress, cap across the roach, new roach, cleaning the board and the eyelets, etc. doesn't help. Any other advice? Thank you. Well, that can be a real trick. Lead dress, I'm going to assume you also played around with the wires going to the tremolo speed and intensity pots, because sometimes if those are passing too close to the reverb wires or too close to the tone stack wires, you can get cross bleed there. It's not that usual. If I had your amp on the bench, the first thing I would do is I would pull V4, which would mute the output of the vibrato channel, and I'd see if I still had ticking. And then I'd pull V6, the phase inverter, and see if I still had ticking. If I still have ticking with the phase inverter gone, that means that it's not in the audio path, it's actually in the power supply. So I would look at overall grounds in the amp. You say 70s deluxe reverb, we'll get to that more on that in just a second. And I would look at the filter cap condition, because you can have a filter cap that's not doing well, so that stage is not fully decoupled, and so that noise in that stage is getting passed to other stages. Now, on the note of grounds in a 70s deluxe reverb, I don't know what year. If it's a 72 or earlier, you may not have this issue. This 72 Super Reverb does have the issue, so I'm not sure when they started doing it, but Fender started doing bizarre ground things in the 70s. If you look at a 66 example, the screen, the phase inverter and preamp nodes of the power supply are all grounded together in the doghouse, and that goes to one ground to the chassis right by the input jack. On later amps, they would separate those grounds out, and some phase inverter might be over here, the screen might be here, the phase inverter might be here, and the preamp is over here. But that's not the only thing they did. They started having these little spiral grounds coiled around the leads going to the pots. And those would be grounded to the board, to a cathode, which is ground, and tied to the chassis, brass control strip, which is ground. But they would also have the wire from the cathode going to that brass strip. So what I have done on this one, I'll be showing in a video a couple of days from now, is I disconnect all the extraneous grounds. I redo it so that all the filter caps are done like Leo did. So you have the reservoir cap is grounded by the power supply, and all the other caps are grounded over by the input. And then I would all those little coiled wires that they added around the lead dress, I snip one in, so it's a telescoped ground. So it still gives some shielding, but it's not two past the ground of different lengths, because you could have just an eddy current in there, or you could have a filter cap. I would have to have your amp on the bench to give any more than that, though. Sorry. Hey, Michael Fielka. He says, I once said charred Fender fiber boards often leak DC and are unusable. Does that apply to small spots, eyelet size too, or just large areas, whole boards? What was the point exactly? Well, you see me get DC out of a fiber board a lot on these old Fenders, and that's when moisture is soaked up into the board, and the moisture is a conductive path, and the moisture traps particles on the surface, and those particles become conductive. That's the stuff you can clean up very easily. If you actually have burning, actual charring on a board, then when it burns, it's turned to carbon. That paper, that fiber board is essentially very thick cardboard. It turns to carbon, and carbon is a great, almost perfect conductor. So once you have a carbon spot, a burn, it's really hard not to have, if you have here's point A and point B, and you don't want them to have any conductivity between them, and they have a big charred area there, they're going to have conductivity. So you can cut out areas around a burn. If you have a small hole, you can cut, if the burn mark is the size of an eyelet, you can make one the size of a nickel or a quarter around it. And if the board has extensive burning, replace the board, because once that carbon's there, it's pretty much there, and you can't do anything magical about it. Hey, Louis Sherwin, what AX7s am I recommending these days? I have been using Electro-Harmonix 7025s for anything related to the audio path whenever is possible, and the JJ ECC 83 in places like the Tremolo driver in a Fender. I will also happily use a JJ ECC 83 anywhere. They're still a very good tube. They seem to no longer have the problem where the vacuum is poor or the glass is weak, and they just white cap instantly. But my preference right now, this month, it could change any moment, is the Electro-Harmonix 7025s. Those are the ones that have silver print that say 7025. The gold print that says 12AX7 tend to be garbage. I have liked in the past the 7025s that TAD has been selling, but then I got a batch that were all completely microphonic. So I don't know whether it was just a batch. It's so hard to keep up with this stuff. Hey, Chris Richards. I have never worked on or seen inside a Wizard amp. Sorry. I only offer opinions on amps that I have experience with. And speaking of Burns night, Martin, last week we talked about this, and I told the story about me reciting "Ode to a Mouse" on the sidewalk by Westminster, and it just seemed out. I forgot to give you guys the punchline. Is that we're standing there looking at this mouse, and we're surrounded by all this glory of Westminster. The Houses of Parliament on the left, and the Jewel Tower and Westminster Abbey behind us, and we're on our way to the Tate Britain, and the entire poem just came to me. So my wife is standing there listening to me recite Robert Burns to this poor little mouse. Anyway, that's how my brain works. What is a good bias point or range for a 63 Fender Brown Princeton? Thank you, sir. Well, thank you, David Hoisman. Or Hoseman. I would tend to go about 45 to 55% dissipation on that if you're going to be using the tremolo a lot, because if you turn the bias up beyond that, the tremolo kind of goes more. You get more artifacts in the tremolo as the bias is hotter. And that amp has got a lot of preamp gain already, so you don't really need to have the output section adding too much gusto to that. So, try 50%, turn it down to 45, turn it up to 55, turn it up to 60, see if you think I'm wrong. But as I have found with those cathode bias tremolos, that the hotter the bias, the more artifacts you get from using the tremolo. Hey there, Forgotten Gear Restorations. We need to get you on the channel very soon. I tried to get you on before, and you had kid schedule interruptions, and I totally relate to that. That was me 20 years ago. And then the bathroom ate my life. We're gonna get Frank on the channel soon. We need to do that. He does really good work. You guys need to know about him. So check out his channel, Forgotten Gear Restorations, after my stream, though. Hey, Joseph Janney. I have a very high opinion of Chris Marin's transformers. They're fantastic. I have tried to buy them from him, and he is apparently as bad at email as I am. I'm not the only one in this industry who's running small one-man or very small operations, and it's easy to get behind in the day-to-day stuff like that. And but maybe he was too busy winding fantastic transformers. But they're great. Hey, Tony Leach. Yeah, I saw a video. Was it John who did with the modified versions of their amps? Marshall started going downhill in '83, and by '90 it was farther downhill, aside from some of the reissues. And then by 2000 it was way down, and now they're focusing more on their Bluetooth products and Marshall branded stuff than they are the amp design. Nothing that they sell today, with the exception of some of the hand-wired reissues, is anything that Jim Marshall would have allowed out of his shop. If you want to look at what Marshall should be, look at Friedman, look at Sir, Metro. How important is it to you that it says Marshall? Marshall. I can't talk today. They're selling a badge. Some investment group bought that brand, and they're leveraging their brand equity. Hey, Frank, my scope is sniffing me, talking. So as I talk, it's going, but because it's hooked up to my iPad, which is playing back what you guys see, and there's about a 10 to 15 second delay, it's not in real time to what I'm saying here, but it's in real time to what I said. At some point, I'll have it synced up to this, but it's just that's over there and this is over here, and I don't want to trip on more wires. So just a way of get something moving and colorful in the background there. Let's freak it out. There it goes. Hey, Anus McMuffin. All right, you win the username of the day award, Anus McMuffin. I don't want that, though I guess it's better than the sausage. He just brought a 62 Tremolo back to life. Great amp. Yes, it should be, but the tremolo is creating a slight thudding sound on the speaker. Is that normal? Thanks. Yeah, that can be very normal. 62 Tremolux. I would have to look up the schematic right now, but let me do that real fast. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. Bear with me. I may even share a screen. Let's see. Window. Let's see here. Try to remember the specifics of a 62, probably Tremolux. And I know it's very exciting watching me look up stuff, but there are amps I know like the back of my hand, and there are amps that I need a little reminder for. That'd be the 6G9B. All right, yeah. I think that's what you're talking about. Let's see here. Let me close some tabs that, and not porn or anything, just stuff you guys don't need to see. All right, and let me share the screen just a second. And we want to show Safari. Yeah, all right, it's working. Cool. Can you guys still hear me, though? I'll make sure you guys can still hear me when I do this. Sometimes it gets weird when you do this kind of thing. Says you should. Let's see. Hopefully you guys are all seeing this. So the Tremolux. All right, yeah, so it's just the bias trim. And that thud. See that 0.1 microfarad right there? After the 220K, and then it goes to the intensity pot. If you look at the Princeton Reverb, you'll notice that while they have a 1 meg versus a 220K, after that 0.1, they have a 22 nanofarad, a 0.022 to ground, from this point going to ground, and that takes a lot of that thudding off the Princeton Reverb tremolo circuit in comparison to the Tremolux. So that's what I would recommend. I would say do that. Let's hopefully now minimize this. And go back to the regular thing. Hopefully that helps. You look up the Princeton Reverb reissue. Basically, it's that same tremolo. A few values are different, but there's that additional cap to ground, and that takes some of that thudding out. Where were we? All right. Hey, T777. I like the Twin videos anyway for a Princeton size amp to get that sound. To a degree, if you know the number one difference between the Princeton and that, in terms of overall response, is aside from the size of the speaker and the size of the cabinet. But the Princeton has got a fixed 6.8K mids resistor, and the Twin's got a 10K audio taper mids pot. So when it's at halfway up, like you saw in that video, that's about 1K, 1.5K. So you can always play around with either adding a mids pot to a Princeton or just decreasing the value of that mids resistor from anywhere from 6.8K down to 1K or 470 ohms. You know, resistors are cheap. You can temp in a 10K audio taper pot in place of that 6.8K resistor, turn it to say, hey, that's what I'm looking for, measure it, and then replace it with that resistor. So 2.7K and 1.5Ks are things I commonly put in Princeton's for people who want it to sound like a tiny twin. And it won't do the entire. It won't be the entire twin sound. You know, got cathodine versus long tail pair. You know, great big 6L6s versus two little V6s, and then tenor speaker versus a 2x12. You know, all those things. But that mids electronically is one of the bigger differences. Anything from NAMM stick out to me this year? I have not been to NAMM since 2005, 2006. NAMM is a soul draining experience, and it seems to be decreasingly necessary or interesting. So I am totally unaware of anything that's come out of NAMM this year, but I'm sure lots of other people love it. Hey, six-string codger. Are amp kits worthwhile? KLD, Trinity, or Mojotone? I don't know about KLD. I don't know about Trinity. Mojotone's quite good. You know, if you know how to, if you already have some experience, go for it. But you know, if you're out of practice, start small. Make a little tweed or blackface champ, and then work your way up from there. Learn on smaller, lower voltage things with simpler circuits. But if you really feel confident, the Mojotone stuff's good. What is the difference besides the reverb between a Blackface Twin and a Showman amp? The reverb. It's the reverb. I'm trying to remember. Did they do the reverb circuit and just omit the reverb tank on that? I haven't had a Showman in a long time. If it's not just like a reverb tank, then it could also be the gain staging. And let me again look that up because I've got that access to it here. Just a second. Quite the thing today where people are asking about the very few models I don't have memorized. Let's see. Showman AB763. Okay, yeah, it's not just that it doesn't have the reverb circuit, but it doesn't have the additional gain stage and bright cap. So it's like two normal channels with vibrato added. So it's going to have a little smoother sound. If you listen to yesterday's video where I showed the normal channel versus the reverb channel on the Twin, I talk about that difference because of the additional gain stage and some pre-emphasis parts of the circuit. So basically, the Showman exists because people thought the Twin, the Marshall heads look sexy with the heads and cabs, and it's really difficult to put a reverb tank in a head. And so by using the exact same model they already had, leaving out some stuff, they can make a stack all of a sudden to compete with Marshall. So there's nothing wrong with the Showman, though. Hey, Alain, bonjour. Hope you and Amy are well. My thoughts on currently available 70K tap pots for Browns. Yeah, they're crappy. Murray Abma. I would just do the standard AB763 treble pot. The Brown's not that necessary. If you want to emulate it, you can just add like a 1 nanofarad to ground in series with a resistor and play around with the value of that resistor until it slightly smooths out. There's a reason that circuit lasted about 2 years, and Leo came out with the AB763 tone stack. It gets most of the same sounds, gets some other sounds the other one doesn't do, and a less expensive, less rare pot. Even back in the day, and today the pots that are available, the tap pots are pretty crappy. Hey, Analog Simple Man, I do have my coffee. I'm having Community Coffee Cafe special this week. And cathode bias amps that claims to accept multiple tube types. Is it really okay to change tube types? Thanks in advance for your answer. Cheers. Well, yes, depending on the manufacturer, it should be safe. Basically, what's going to happen is that some tube types are going to run optimally and others are going to run really, really cold, but won't hurt anything as long as the design was done well. So, I can't speak for every possible design out there. Might be someone doing it wrong and running some tubes unsafely, but generally, the stuff, whether it's Mesa or whether it's why can't I talk today? They made the hot plate THD, like the univalve stuff. It's all going to be fine. You just, while you can use different tube types, one of them is going to be better optimalized for the circuit, both in terms of the bias and in terms of the primary resistance and reflected impedance. The primary impedance of the output transformer for a particular kind of tubes. And hopefully the amp is optimized for both in terms of bias and the output transformer primary impedance for one tube type. While the others will work and will give different sounds, they're not going to sound necessarily their best. Hope that's clear. Hey, Angry Shoebox, I'm glad the little fan's working for you, but it shouldn't be necessary on an amp in that price range. It will certainly help, even if you do everything possible to the Blues Junior. It's just so much heat for those poor lead-free soldered sockets mounted to the flimsy PCB, which is just too much heat and current for that setup. So yeah, if you got a little fan, that's great. Tor, what channel have you been watching? Is it acceptable to add a virtual center to the heater supply circuit that doesn't have a physical center tap? Joe Rust asks. Joe, any amp that doesn't have a physical center tap is going to have an artificial center tap. If you don't see it, maybe there that you're not aware of it. Otherwise, you'll hear home. So if you're, maybe you're asking if you have a new transformer that doesn't have a physical center tap, is it acceptable to use one? Yes. But if you have a physical center tap and it's connected, don't also add an artificial center tap or you'll get a different kind of noise. Hey, Sebastian. No, that's a real question to me. For the last few videos, you got with a weird translation of my titles and a strange AI voice in German, a YouTube thing. I thought I had that turned the freak off. Right after this, I will find that because they're doing an experimental AI voiceover, but I cannot imagine that the AI is going to be good at at translating the technical stuff I'm discussing. This is the first time in my life I wish I did have a VPN because I would love to hear what I sound like in German. Yikes. But it should be something that the user can turn off. If not, then Google's really messing up. I will find that setting and disable it from this point forward. I thought that it was something that the user had to choose to hear, that not something that I was imposing on anyone. I thought, hey, if it helps someone, I'll leave it enabled and they can turn it on. But should be a way to say, no, let me hear the original language. I'll find out. Thank you, Sebastian. Danke. I'm sorry. Danke. Danke, Sebastian. Hey, Jay Rosales has been wondering about this for some times already. Well, I caused damage to an amp that requires 8 ohm speakers, but the cab I have has 16 ohm speakers. Everyone's favorite answer, it depends. First of all, you're saying 8 ohm speakers and the cab has 16 ohm speakers, you may be misunderstanding what it says. You may have two 16 ohm speakers wired in parallel in your cab. So while the speakers are 16 ohms each, because they're in parallel, you're going to have a total load of 8 ohms, and your amp is accepting 8 ohms. So that's fine. In general, and this is from the way you worded your question, you may need to research this so much. In general, it's okay, Not optimal, but okay most of the time to be off by a factor of 1. So if you have a 16 ohm load and your amp expects an 8 ohm load, it's a safe offset, but you're going to lose about 3 dB. If you have an 8 ohm load on your amp, but the speaker you have is 4 ohms, you're off by a factor of 1. You're also okay. What you don't want to do is have the amp expect to see 16 ohms and you give it 4 ohms, or the amp expect to see 8 ohms and you give it 2 ohms. That's when you're going to potentially cause damage. The other thing you have to be aware of is the wattage of the speakers versus the wattage of the amplifier you use. So don't use two 20-watt speakers with a 100-watt amp. So look that stuff up, and if you have further questions, I'll be glad to answer you if I can. See, that's crazy. If it make you, because what would happen then if you watched, Magisterium, if you watched something that was in Portuguese and it decided that because you prefer to have English as your language, that you would give you the AI English version. That's nuts. It should be on a video by video basis. Like, hey, I want to watch this in 4K quality. I'm on Wi-Fi. Just do 720. Oh, I want to hear this in the original language, or give this to me in Portuguese or Dutch or whatever. Deutsch. Let's see. Sunzu, you can play around with using the internal circuitry to attenuate the send and make up the gain, but you're probably not going to have enough gain available on the return out of the existing circuit. You might be able to get enough clean, quiet gain out of it. If you feel qualified to play around with it, play around with it. I tend to, I've got that circuit all tracked down and, traced out, and I made it to Unity. You should be able to do something along the lines, but it's nice to either have pedals that work at the line level or to have a dedicated external solution, because then you could use it with multiple amps if you had more than one amp with a line level effects loop. Hey, Michael. Building a Fender Showman reverb head. Is the spacing from the irons to the reverb tank enough if I use 70s dimensions? If you have the 70s cab, which is this high, sure. You don't want to squeeze it into like a 60s head cab. But, there's always a balancing act squeezing reverb into a head cab. You don't want to be like Dr. Z or Marshall and have buzz. Marshall gets around that on some of their models by having the tank mount not face down, but on its side. You have to use a different tank for that, for the way it's suspended. But sometimes Marshall, like a JCM 900, gets away with having relatively quiet reverb tank in a head, though the tanks that they use are not very good. Thanks, Jim Mass. I appreciate that. Yeah, the likes really do help. The likes, you're all subscribers if you're here commenting with me, and I appreciate that. But, it's a funny thing how the algorithm works. Just remember that on most channels, you would have already had 4 ads at this point in a live stream. And I don't do that to you. I debated whether to have it play ads, when manually tell it to play an ad when we do the 7-minute intermissions. But first of all, I always forget to have that control panel open when I'm doing this stuff. And second of all, tends to be that when I'm doing an intermission, you guys are still talking to each other, and I don't want to interrupt that for you guys with some stupid ad for some VPN that would let me hear myself in German. So I'm resisting the urge to monetize. So give me a like. Thanks. Hey, Strumbum, appreciate that. Well, I'm going to be doing a video on building a 5E3, which will have those changes. But mostly the changes that I do to a 5E3 are just saying, this is not supposed to be a bass amp, it's not supposed to be a keyboard amp, it's not supposed to be an accordion amp, it's not supposed to be a vocal amp, it's a guitar amp. The fundamental of a guitar is 82 hertz roughly. So let's go an octave below that, 41 hertz. All right, let's go a little bit below that so we're not getting any weirdness. Let's do the cutoff, the lowest frequency of the sync and pass without being attenuated is about 36 hertz, as opposed to like 7 hertz in the stock amp. And just doing that cumulatively, just cleaning up each gain stage, so the high pass is like 30 to 40 hertz, really makes the amp more efficient. It's not trying to amplify all the little sounds your hand makes against the strings that the pickups pick up, but it can't come through the speakers. So that energy, which is not being used to amplify stuff that can't make it through the power tubes, output transformer, or speaker, is energy which is available for everything else. So you get more dynamic range as well. Hey, Kimball, is the reissue 62 Marshall Bluesbreaker worth buying? Does it sound similar to the original? It can be worth buying. As you can see on my channel, I've got 4 of them up, I think. On 2 of them, I had to rotate the power or output transformer orientation because Marshall got that wrong. On the last one, they got that right, but the power transformer was buzzy because the power transformers used in the 90s and 2000s by Marshall are pieces of shit. And I made some over-the-top changes to all those because, hey, it's me. I want them to be the best possible. If someone brings it to me, I don't want to just say, I made it not go anymore. I try to make it awesome. So, but in terms of, hey, is this a really good amp? Potentially it is. But you should also see if you can find a used Germino in a similar price range, because that's going to be an infinitely better amp, even if it doesn't look like the Bluesbreaker wholly. It'll be cosmetically similar. .5/8 to 15 millimeter reducer. Oh, Jesus, Kevin. Well, that's your fault for abandoning the good old SAE standards. Now everything over there is metric, and your plumbing's got to conform. I'm sure ours does the same thing. They just call it something else. Anyway, let's see. Driving me crazy, Andy says. 71 Fender Pro reverb channel like 80% gain loss. Totally baffled. Well, there could be a lot of things. That's not enough information for me to tell you for sure. The first thing is make sure you don't have bad tubes. The second thing, make sure you don't have bad grounds or bad connection. Andy, give me more information in a different question. But that's too much open-ended. That's too open-ended for me to give you specific advice. Sorry. Hey, Resor Days. If we have a question that's a bit too long or detailed for chat, what's the best way to ask? Well, I don't mean to be rude. I do not mean to be rude, but right now there is no best way to ask. I am so busy. This is the time I have for this kind of interaction. And I do 3 hours I did it last week, did this week. Sometimes I'll do it once a month. I do what I can, but this is even if someone wanted to call and schedule a consult and pay me, I can't guarantee I'd have that time that particular day. I've got so many things I've got to get done. But you can try to touch on it. Maybe the answer is shorter than you think. I may not know. If so ask what we think it is, and if you need to break it up into 3 or 4 posts because YouTube won't let you do more than this much text at once, I'll try to read through it. Thanks. Do Silverface 74 twin reverbs have reverb in channel 1? Jorge asks. No, Jorge, they don't. Someone might have modded it, but no Fenders until no vintage style Fenders until the 68 Custom Series have ever had reverb in channel 1. So it might have been. I'm sure there's some of the 80s solid state and weird things did. Like I know the red knob tube did, but not well. Hey, Nella. The bathroom renovation is going well. It has not changed since last Saturday because it was like 4 degrees here some days this past week, and that meant it was like 20 something degrees in that room, and I could not do that. So it's getting up into the 40s and 50s this week. So it'll resume. I've got the plumbing, the drains in for the sink and bathtub. I've got the sink and toilet. I've got to extend the drains and install the drain P-trap and venting for the tub location, and then I've got to rough in the hot and cold supplies, and I've got some HVAC stuff to deal with. But I've got all the joists in place. Everything's rock solid. Everything's really solid. And I've got the first layer of subfloor cut and in place, but haven't installed it permanently because I need to move it in sections to be able to work underneath it before I button it all up. Thank you for asking. Let's see. Big Boss, what might cause a 6V6 tube amp to lose volume and definition after about 15 minutes of runtime? A lot of things, Big Boss. You could have a bad tube. You could have bad tubes, plural. You could have a bad solder joint. You could have bad filter caps. You could have something which is some capacitor, some old ceramic capacitor in the amp that's really subject to humidity or temperature that's acting up. I would have to know which amp it was and in what year. Hey, Bottom Kitchen. Yeah, the strip of wood running down the center of the speaker circle in older Vox amp baffles does it actually do anything? Yeah, it's supposed to do two things. It's supposed to protect the speakers from being kicked, which it does moderately, and it's also supposed to be a beam blocker. It's supposed to break up the highs. As you know, the blues in a Vox can be very bright sounding, and most studio engineers know. Let me find a pen. Here's a Sharpie. If I'm speaking into the microphone and I use a lot of S's, one of the old tricks to deal with that was they would take a pencil, this is a Sharpie, and they would gaff tape it to the microphone. And all of a sudden the S's get broken up. Same principle. Just breaks up those ultra-high frequencies a little bit. I don't know if that's going to come through, where you heard the decrease in sibilance from this or not, or whether I just made thuds for you guys. Because I don't hear what the mic hears when I'm doing this stuff. Let me know if you heard a difference there. Anyway, that's the principle, and it certainly works with like large diaphragm U87s and stuff. And in theory, it's a beam blocker and for high frequencies. And I remember in the 80s and 90s, they sold something called the beam blocker that you could mount on your cabs for the same reason. Stevie Ray Vaughan just used big squares of duct tape, got the same result. Wes heard Ainsley Lister's 60s Princeton that had a deluxe reverb power transformer. It sounded incredible. Yeah, Chris at Rift Amps does good work. Yeah, that would be a good choice. You just need to, you can't just stick a deluxe reverb power transformer into a Princeton. You know that, Wes. And Chris knows that, but it can be done. Remember that the Princeton was limited. It was never designed to be the best possible single channel with reverb and tremolo 10-inch speaker amp possible. It's supposed to be good enough that you wanted it compared to a champ, but not good enough that you wanted it over a deluxe reverb. So it was always limited to make the deluxe reverb more desirable. Hey, Brendan Gottnick. He's running a Joyo American Sound in front of his DSL 40CR or AC15 C1X to cover Fender tones until I can afford one. Can I recommend a cab sim that covers vintage Fenders? Thanks. Well, first of all, the AC15 C1X will do better Fender tones than any pedal into the AC15 will do. You don't What is a Fender tone? Most of the sounds that you could have heard me get yesterday out of these deluxe reverbs, I've got an AC15 over there, C1X. I can get very similar sounds out of on the clean stuff. It's a very you have two very good amps. And as far as a cab sim that covers vintage Fenders, you mean like a hardware cab simulator or software? Because most of the things are using IRs, and there's an infinite number of IRs out there. I like the Yorkville Audio IRs, and I've got them for Tone X, and I've got them for various plugins here and neural DSP stuff. But I would need more information from you, Brendan, to be able to give you a better answer. But I would not think that you need to run anything in front of either the DSL-40CR or AC15C1X to get Fender sounds. I would see what clean sounds that they do, because I guarantee you can get a sound out of each one of those amps you already have that no one listening would say, oh, that's kind of cool, but it sure would be better if it said Fender on it. It's going to be a great clean. The AC15 over the DSL-40CR, but the DSL-40, it's a very good amp for what it does. Hey, Richard. What era twins should be sought after, which should be avoided? Well, the golden period would be 63 through 72. Starting in late 72, they stopped using the screwed-in baffle boards. They went to glued and dadoed-in baffle. Starting in 73, they started adding a lot of wax to the board. Throughout the 70s, the wiring level decreased. I've taken about 3 feet of excess wire out of the 72, and if this were a 78, it'd be even more to come out. But it's still fundamentally a good amp. They started making changes to certain models throughout the decade, but none of the 70s twins cannot be made great. Some of them, like the 135, is an ultralinear amp, which some people will love and some people won't love. It could be made into a blackface style amp. I don't recommend it. I think it's nice for the late 70s ultralinears to be restored properly rather than made into a facsimile of something from 10 years previous. I think later there'd probably be some demand for those underappreciated late 70s. So I would say that up to 72, great. 72 through 76, really good. 76 to 80, maybe not as desirable to some people. After 80, avoid until they come out with the 65 reissue series. Avoid all the evil twins, the 94s, and the red knobs. I like Paul Rivera. I respect Paul Rivera. There's a difference between what Paul Rivera does himself and what Paul Rivera intended for Fender to do versus what Fender actually did with Paul Rivera's designs. So I'm not a fan of the 80s Rivera Fenders, but that's not a reflection on Paul. That's because the factory was doing insane things then. Strumbum, I am doing the K-Line demo video soon. I've got to get someone in to do a long playing demo on just the guitar, not that guitar versus other things, and I've got to do a voiceover. I've got most of it filmed. I'm just trying to do a good job, and that doesn't mean spit and polish on everything. And like I said last week, I'm not trying to make it better than life, but I'm trying to give you guys as close as possible to what you would take away from playing it yourself without being able to play it yourself. Hi, Nick. Nick recently got a PRS DGT-15 that started hiss after 2 days. I took it back to the store for a fix, and they said the amp is fine. Unbelievable, like people can think something wrong is normal. Well, if it started to hiss after 2 days, it may be fine. You may have an issue with electricity, the supply. It may be a tube. I don't think that an amp hissing or producing hiss is necessarily a sign of something being wrong. It's a symptom, And I don't know whether the store that you took it to knows they're asked from a hole in the ground. If I were working at a store like that, and you brought me a PRS DG15 that used to not hiss and then started to hiss, I would say, let's try some different preamp tubes. But you don't need to. Don't worry about your amp. Basically, is what I'm saying. Most of the time, especially on new amps, and that's a very well built amp. Most of the time, you can have a very dramatic symptom caused by a very simple, inexpensive problem. And it's probably just a preamp tube that's not holding up to the job, because the tubes these days are not even as good as they were 10 years ago. Oh, Steve Lark, working on a vintage 66 Deluxe Reverb. 4 of the pot shafts are frozen and won't budge. Tried lube, heat, nothing works. Any advice on how to free them up? Thank you, sir. That's always fun. Well, I would not be afraid to say, hey, we need to replace these pots. But the first thing I would do if the goal was, if at all possible, retain these pots, is I would take the pots out of the amp. I would disconnect the wires, and a CTS pot or Central Labs, whatever's in there, it's going to have 4 tabs that hold the case to the top. Lift those 4 tabs up gently, just pry them up, and then the entire shaft will come out with the 3 lugs, and then there's the wafer, and then there's the shell. And then you can maybe see if anything is built up inside. Maybe there's some rust that you could attack from inside. But at some point, there's a brass sleeve, and then there's the brass shaft, and there's that little gap between them. And if that is just corroded as hell, you may not have any recourse but to change them out. But once you have it disassembled like that, so you've just got pretty much the top of the pot, which connects to, which holds the shaft itself, you can heat that up a lot more easily than you can heat it up when it's all together, especially when it's mounted to a chassis or anything, because you're just going to be a massive heat sink. So at that point, I would try applying a dry soldering iron to the brass bushings and heating them up, and then seeing if I can get it to turn at that point. But there's no shame in saying, hey, well, it's time to change those pots out. They're mechanical devices. They're rated for however many turns in their lifetime, and if they've had it. Hey, Otto von Fledermaus, welcome back. Hey, Pastor Bent on it. Have I worked on a Marshall 86? Yeah, he's got one on the bench now. There's signs of an earlier recap on the board, but here the large can caps have to go. Yeah, I've worked on the 86. It's like the 87 with some different values. Mid-70s should be fantastic. Be interested to know what the B plus is on yours, because I know in the mid-70s, the B plus on the 87s and to lesser degree the 59s, but especially the 87s, really got low, like 370, 380 B plus. Be interesting to know if they use the same power transformer on the 86 with the same drop, because you certainly wouldn't want, for bass, you wouldn't want that. Of course, those amps have always been for bass, as Tool will tell you. All right, we're coming up right here to the top of the hour. We've got a minute to go. So we're going to take an intermission in just a minute. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next chapter and make sure that I've got that audio muted on it. And go to the next Now it is. Then I'm going to my third one. Audio muted on it. Go to the next. And then this one. Then I'm going to my third one. Audio muted on it. And this one. Then I'm going to my third. I'm sorry, just playing a little bit of house cleaning here. I'm sorry. Things I did not know I would need to do, but apparently I have gotten. We've gotten the echo out now. Should be good now. All right. So see you guys back in 7 minutes, and we'll get back to the questions. Thank you very much. Hey, Nick, I read while I was on intermission, I stepped outside for a minute, but I was looking at the current chat. I saw that you said you pulled all the tubes, including, all the preamp tubes one at a time. You still had hiss. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying that's really unusual because usually when you pull the phase inverter, at the very least, you should have no sound whatsoever. Where do you live? That should be under warranty. PRS is going to have a good warranty. So talk to PRS, even if your local dealer are a bunch of asshats. Something can be done about that. It should not be doing that. And I was not making fun of you earlier, but I don't want you to be worried because it could be something very simple. Like Martin says, Brad, my buddy Brad's Guitar Garage, is doing a live stream after we finish. So at 4, he's starting up. And so if you need more amp information in your life with a more entertaining, or at least more vulgar persona presenting the information, I highly recommend my buddy Brad. Let's see, where were we? Hey, Robbie F. If Showman, if you get, what kind of work would I do on the amp to make it special? Exactly what you would see in those 2 twin videos, though it takes less work in a Showman because it's a simpler circuit. Mostly recapping, replacing every electrolytic, replacing everything which can get hot, and cleaning the hell out of things. I am a high-tech janitor most of the time, and it's easy to say, he just cleaned it. Well, that does an awful lot. Time travel, limited. That's my job. Does changing tubes in an amp make any real differences worth it? Well, if you have a tube which is defective or noisy, then yes, changing it makes a huge difference. Other than that, it gets debatable. And those who sell tubes will tell you that it makes a huge difference. And those who have just paid $300 for an old Sylvania will say, yes, I hear a huge difference because we hear with our wallets and we hear with our eyes. But, the tubes in those twin videos the past 2 days where people were saying that's like the best amp I've ever heard, that was a mismatch set of tubes I cobbled together. I had 2 JJ 6L6s, 2 Mesa 6L6s. So I knew the JJs were matched to each other, and the Mesas, Sovtecs were matched to each other, but the JJs and the Sovtecs probably weren't matched to each other. So I just had one JJ and one Mesa per side, so match per side. Then a mixture of generic and old, inexpensive preamp tubes through the whole thing. Chinese tubes and the AT7 driving the reverb. And people said how great that reverb sounded. I think people give tubes way too much credit. That said, noisy tubes, microphonic tubes, weak tubes, they exist. And so a non-weak, non-noisy, non-microphonic tube is always going to be better. But whether you're going to hear this between Philips and Sylvania or Tungsram, maybe. Hey, Jorge, would I mix an ET65 and G12C speakers on a twin reverb reissue? I have not tried that mixture. Those are each of my favorite speakers for a twin, and I bet it would be a good mixture. You're going to have a little more mids out of the ET65. I bet they pair well together, but I've not tried it. And plus, that way, with a mic, you could choose which kind of sound you want to dominate in the mix. But yeah, I think that'd be worthwhile trying. My shop cab that you guys hear most of the time, it's got the ET65 and the Veteran 30, but I usually put the mic on the ET65. And it's just, if I put the Royer within 6 inches of that ET65, I just check my levels and I record. I don't have to tweak it. I'm 6 inches out. So anywhere towards the middle is pretty much just the sweet spot. I have played around with very precise mic placement. I've played around with blending the Royer and the 57. And maybe if I were recording Gaucho, I would. But I've learned that if I put that Royer about 6 inches in front of that ET65, make sure I don't clip, and I press record, that's what it sounds like in the room is what you guys hear. With the caveat that to hear what it sounds like in the room, your playback system would need to be like 85 to 90 dB. at which point it would sound like it did in the room if your speakers are up to it. I can only do so much on my end. But thank you, Jorge. Hey, D-Drac. Thank you for joining us. Could I perhaps explain why Trainer tied the G3 or the EL34s to the raw bias supply? Any pros, cons doing this? No, it's great. It's more negative than ground. So they tied it to a negative voltage, the raw bias, so like negative 50 volts or whatever. And so it's the suppressor grid. And so most EL34 amps, like a Marshall, pin 8 and pin 1, are both tied to ground. On Trainers, they tie one to ground and they tie one to the raw bias, which is even better than ground. And it makes sense. You get a better performance out of the amp. No cost increase to the amp other than another piece of wire, and a couple pieces of wire depending on how many tubes. It makes sense. It's called the Trainer trick, and you can look up all the technical stuff. But yeah, it's a great idea to do any fixed bias amp. If I were designing a fixed bias amp, that'd be with the EL34s. That's something that I would do myself because it's an easy way to get better performance. Now, is it like night and day better? No, it's all in the margins. So you got to have this in the margin, this marginal increase, this marginal increase, this little increase, this little increase. You end up with a cumulative, great sounding amp, but it's not like, oh, I made that one change and life is good now. Hey, Lone Wolf McQuaid. Well, you'd have to contact me at info@sonicaudio.com, but I'm not accepting any repairs, taking any repairs right now because I've still got a backlog. But if you get in the queue, I will. You might get a rare spot. I don't mean to sound weird about it or like, oh, you might be lucky. Because of the channel, I get many more requests for work than I could ever do. I could, if I were to open my email right now and say, yes, send it to the first 30 emails I find, I would have 30 amps in my living room. And, some of them would get done within the next 6 months and people will get mad. So I tend to be very selective about how many I let in at once and which ones I let in. Attention! This machine is not for finger poking or dumb coughs, rubbernecking peeping lookers. Keep damn hands in their pockets and relax, and the machine will not springs schnappen popping corking. All right. So apparently Pastor Benton there had just escaped from a Mel Brooks movie about 1972. And I think we need all those things. Orbalofusen. Achtung. Now, if I were to read that and practice it and read that in a good, Colonel Klink, what was Sergeant Schultz? If I were to read that as Sergeant Schultz in the context of a real video, and then someone had to hear the German AI version of my bad German impression, would the universe explode? We should try that. Fucking with AI. Speaking of fucking with AI, I am trying mightily to find out how I can disable the AI suggested comments on my channel. I don't know if you guys see that, but if someone comments on my videos, I get like 3 possible replies to choose from. I have never, for this been in the slightest felt the slightest temptation to use one of those prefab replies, and most of them are just fucking ludicrous, and I don't want to have that, and I can't make it go away on my end. It's kind of the next 5 years are going to be really tricky about that. I mean, I've seen Blade Runner 2049. If we end up with each of us having our own personal Ana de Armas, I can see the pros and cons of AI, but right now I'm mostly seeing the cons. Jeff Mazzet's got a Bad Cat. Truthfully, it's the best sounding amp I've ever owned. Have I had any experience? What's my opinion? I think that's great, Jeff. I'm glad for you. I've had Bad Cats in that have been total heat failure nightmares, and I've had bad Cats in that were just absolutely fine. I understand they have a new engineer. I talked about this last week, who's been doing some really good work, and fingers crossed that everything that they do from this point forward is just the best possible. But the earlier Bad Cats that were just matchless copies with the can clamps on glass tubes and stuff, and tubes biased at 200% dissipation, I'm not a fan of those. But they've been doing this for a while now, so I think it's if you've got a great one, you've got a great one, and that's fantastic. Hey, Yeatsy, thanks for joining us. Hey, Jazz Bass. Thank you very much. Thinking about buying an Albion TCT 100 Steve Gringrod amp. Do I know my amp? I do not. Thanks from UK. Thanks from the US. Steve's an interesting bunch of guys. Some of his designs are really good. Some of his designs are really overly complicated. Like, some of the Voxes he did when his tenure there, there'd be like a string of really great ideas and then some, what was he thinking kind of things. And, it's not fair for me to say that because he's not here to argue with me. He knows his stuff, but I think I would say that Steve likes things to be a little more complicated than I think they need to be, or than prudence might suggest. So I would be cautiously optimistic about an amp that he made himself. Maybe he could have done great things while working at those other companies if the accountants had let him do whatever he wanted. So maybe now he can do whatever he wants. It's just the best thing in the world, and it was just always. It's like I was saying earlier about Paul Rivera's tenure with Fender. There's what Paul could design versus what the factory actually built. Maybe the same thing happened to Steve at Vox. I don't know. Any thoughts on the new Friedman Jose amp? Would it be better to buy a 1975 Marshall? I don't have any thoughts on the Friedman Jose because I don't know anything about it other than I saw in some video that he's got one. I've not spoken to Dave in a few months. We remain on good terms. It's just we're both very busy. I am sure. I will tell you this. A 75 Marshall, when operating properly, is a fantastic amp. A Friedman is a fantastic amp. There has never been a stock Marshall from 75 or any other year that's going to sound like a well-modded Marshall, like the Jose stuff was. And I will say this about Jose, with all respect to his family. Jose did some cool things. He also had most of his stuff was kind of tack soldered and not the prettiest work you ever saw. He got there, but it's kind of the duct tape approach. And if Dave is replicating the circuit changes, he's not going to be replicating the duct tape. He's not going to have a bunch of wires tack soldered together and resistors held up in space by one little bit of glue. So if Dave's implementing those changes into an amp, he's seen enough of the Jose stuff. It's going to be repeatable, reliable implementations of the circuits. So I would say that a 75 Marshall is a great thing, and the Friedman Jose should be a great thing, but they're not going to be the same, they're not going to be interchangeable great things. They're going to be two different executions of that idea, if that helps. Hey, Michael Murray. A lot of Marshalls and a lot of other amps pop after you power them off. It can be an issue. It can be normal. It depends on how loud it is, and I don't know whether it, given the market value of solid state Marshalls, it may not be worth having it fixed. If it doesn't damage your speaker, it's fine. Worst comes to worst, unplug your speaker before you turn the amp off, making sure, assuming that that's safe. Some solid state amps are weird about the speaker connections when they're powered on, so I'd have to know which model you have. Mark's got me playing through a 30,000 watt PA. Your poor, poor neighbors. Let's see. Ike Stoddard found a local tech for his HD 130. That's good because those things are heavy-ass beasts. So is it Marshall 8040? I don't recall that model off the top of my head, but same answer applies. If it doesn't hurt anything, it is not hurting anything. You know, if it was going to kill your speaker, it already would have. I just don't know whether it's worth having it fixed or if there is a fix for that. But, you know, make sure that if you feel brave, open it up, make sure all the hardware is tight. A lot of times the Marshalls of that era, the board, all the grounds are made from one screw to the chassis. And if that comes loose, just a little bit loose, you can have buildup and pops and stuff. It's amazing how much better things sound when all the hardware is tight and there's no corrosion. Hey, Joseph Bernal. If I don't mind indulging him, what is my recommendation for an easy-to-find, low-maintenance, good-sounding tube amp at any price point? Well, there are an awful lot of amps at various price points at any price point. Easy to find, low-maintenance, good-sounding. That could be anything from a Swart to a Top Hat to a Two-Rock to a 74 Super Reverb. I look at my Amps Under $500 video and Amps Under $1,000 video for a starting point. Beyond that, look at all the current production amps on my channel. See the ones that I've had experience with. If someone were to say, hey, I just want an amp that always sounds great, won't need a lot of work, then my next question would be, for what styles of music and how loud do you need it to be versus how light do you need it to be? There are a lot of other factors. Not any kind of hand Pro Junior. Pro Juniors are garbage. Sorry to single you out there, parlance. Pro Juniors should not be sold to humans. Tom says he's got YouTube Premium and now ads freeze the app and cook his phone's CPU. That's weird. I've got Premium and I don't have any issues with that. You may need to uninstall and reinstall that app, or at least clear the cache for it. Well, Sunzu, I'm glad. Hope you like the results. It's such a good app, even in stock form. But it's so easy to tweak it just to make it squishier. Squishier is a good word for it. Hey, Jacob K. Guitar. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, if you decrease the filtering, be aware that you will get ghosting, which is what the originals did. You may or may not like that. So one of the things that it can be nice to have around is have on hand some like MOD axial caps. You could try tack soldering in different values to say, do I like 30? Do I like 40? Do I like 22? Before you commit, especially with a big multi-section can cap, that can be a little bit tricky to, they're $10 each and there's a lot of work to install them. Sometimes it's nice to say, all right, I'm going to start with 22. Let's add a 10 to it. Let's add another 10 to it. Okay. Let's add a 47 to that. Okay. You can hear it. And it's all either tack soldered or you can use alligator clips, whatever. As long as you're careful, don't let anything live touch anything it shouldn't, including yourself. I'm glad you got a good deal on the, 200 pounds is a great deal on a Blues Bakery issue, especially if you don't have any hum. Jacob, that's good. They're good amps. They're just not as good as they should have been for what they used to charge. Hey, Joachim, yeah. Rivera, 120 euros. Or sorry, S120. Sorry, really low prices for 550 pounds. Sorry, cannot. I'm right at the limit of my ability to read the damn screen. 550 euros. Apologies. it's a really good price. I don't know why Rivera is not as desirable in some markets, but they're really well made amps. Is there any advantage to replace capacitors on the board on a new Marshall 1987X to high quality caps? As far as I know, the caps on the board in the Marshall 87X are fine. It's the filter caps you may want to change out. I don't remember what the I don't remember what brand Marshall's using in the reissue filter caps though. I don't think there's any problem with them in stock form. The 87X, the only change I would suggest making is disconnecting that stupid heater balance trim pot. Just snip out that pot I've shown it on my channel. Brad's got on his channel. Just instead of having the two resistors going to a pot to ground, just have the two resistors go to ground. It's just a matter of jumping from one turret to the next, so that those heater balance resistors are just that blue trim pot causes fiery problems in the 87X. Other than that, they're nice sounding amps. Is there a Rivera amp head I like? I've not heard any Riveras that make me say, I wish I had that. I've not heard any that made me say, God, that's terrible. They're all fine. None of them are my personal cup of tea, but that's purely subjective. Objectively, they're good amps. Hey, David Galucci, thank you very much. Wondering how high or low I'd rate Dr. Z amps. He loves his Maz 18, but would love to have faith in that if it makes sense. It's built about as well as old Fenders were. I think some of the stuff that they do with the turrets, where they do multiple wraps, is not quite as good as it could have been if they'd done true mil spec and done partial wraps. I think it's a bit overbuilt for the purpose. As far as the Maz 18 and Maz 38, if you have the Mark IIs, they're great. The Mark I's had some circuit weirdnesses, especially the models with reverb. But the Mark IIs for those particular amps are really nice. And the Z-Rack and all the other models that I've tried have been really nice. I'm not a big fan of the Carmen Ghia because I don't like the Zobel network filtering that they're doing. I find it rolls off too much highs, but it's a well-built amp. I don't think that Dr. Z are quite as well made as people want them to be or think that they are, but they're well made. And the main issue with Dr. Z's is because of the thickness of the panels, they don't use tooth washers for input jacks and pots and stuff and output jacks, and they can become loose. So you want to have a 1/2-inch socket wrench and a ratcheting socket tool, and maybe once a year make sure all those things are tight, and life will be good. I don't have any issue with Dr. Z now that they have the Mark II. The Mark I's had some major huns in them. Scott Christ, you got an HRD and the reverb comes in when playing hard but absent when playing softly. Probably a problem in your low voltage supply. If you look at every Hot Rod DeVille and Blues DeVille and Hot Rod Deluxe video on my channel, you'll see the burning 5-watt components and the associated traces and pads. And so it sounds like you're losing you're probably having your low voltage supply, which powers the op amp for the reverb stuff, cut in and out. And as you play hard, it vibrates and connects. It's most likely. That's the only reason it would be level related. But it could also be a few other things. But those amps are so bad, and I'm sorry that you got lumbered with one. I hope you didn't buy it. Anyway, I've shown how to fix that and all those, and fix it, make sure it's working, and then sell it to someone else, and then buy an amp that won't need all that work. Those things cost so much new to have so many predictable, easily avoidable problems, and Fender has not fixed those known issues in 30, 40 years because they don't care. What wire do I use for cleaning up the wiring in a 70s Fender amp? Well, I've got a 72 here, which has got the white spaghetti wire and yellow spaghetti wire in it. And someone in the past had modded it so that channel 1 had its own cathode stuff compared to channel 2. So it was missing the wire from the shared cathode connection from V1B's cathode to V2B's cathode. So that wire needs to be replaced. And I'm going to be using this yellow 22 gauge top coat wire. I get this from Valve Storm. Let me strip a little bit off for you. It's not Teflon, but it's a really nice. It's like 600 degree rated plastic. It's got a real nice top coated, twisted stranded. Behaves like a solid core, but it's actually twisted. I love this stuff. I use this a lot. This is what I'll be using, and this is what I would prefer to use in most 70s Fenders. Most 60s Fenders, I use the waxed cloth-covered pushback stuff. This one is from Mojo Tone, I believe. I also like it very much from Doug Hoffman amps. And the heater wire from Hoffman is the 18 gauge stuff. You saw that in the Twin video the other day. And then from Marshalls and Voxes, I use this stuff. This is from Orange. This is from Tube Depot. It's Teflon coated 20 gauge, and so it's stranded, so it has a nice flex to it. I don't know. I love this. I mean, 22 gauge is sufficient for the voltage and current, but this 20 gauge stuff here. Let's see if I can get it to focus on it, not my face. This 20 gauge stuff here is great because I can pre-bend it and it holds the shape. It works like solid, but it's stranded. So I can have it straight, I can have it kind of floppy, or I can give it a shape if I need to do like in a Vox. Say the original was like that, it was solid core. That works really well. So I love this stuff. So I use a lot of different wires depending on the amp and what the goal is. Yeah, Ted, that's my OnlyFans stuff. I show you my wires. I show you my strippers. Actually, I got to replace those strippers. I've had these for over 10 years, these Southwire strippers, and they've got notches, and they don't meet up very well. And I bought some new Klein strippers for the larger gauge stuff, and the Kleins are so much better. But the trouble is the Kleins don't have this little thing here that locks it like this. So, I need to research the best strippers on the market, but that makes your Google results very weird, and you have to make sure your wife is aware of the context in your search history. Okay, good. You guys heard the difference with the Sharpie in front of the mic. To my ear, 14 gauge wire sounds better between the amp and speakers and the stock 16 or 18. Thoughts? Well, I mean this nicely. It's very unlikely that you're doing a real-time blind A/B comparison. The science says with the wattage present in guitar amps, you're not going to hear any difference unless you have a problem with whatever 16 or 18 gauge wire you had there. And if you had a 30,000 watt PA, like our buddy there who's listening to me through it, and you've got a 600-foot run to your speakers from the power amps, yeah, you'll hear a difference there. But for a foot or two of guitar cable, or 6 feet from a head to a cab at 50 watts, 100 watts, you're not going to hear any difference unless there's a problem with one of the wires or one of the connectors. And maybe you magically hear the difference, but mastering labs are situations where you're going to hear a difference like that. Most mastering labs I know, they use Romex for the speaker cables, like 10 or 12 gauge Romex. Of course, that stuff's rigid. You can But if it makes you happy, it won't hurt. One of the problems with 14-gauge wire is 14-gauge wire doesn't want to fit through most of your connectors. And I'd be very surprised if the jack at each end of that cable were not a bottleneck, because there's only so much material at that jack connection, at the plug connection and the jack connection. So it doesn't matter if you have an 8-gauge wire going to a connection, and there's only so much metal at that connection. So I'm not picking on you, but I think it's easy to say bigger should sound better. I've changed it up from the smaller to the larger. Well, yeah, that sounds better to me. Well, it's been 10 minutes and you can't really do a fast, blind comparison. Did Amnesia? I'm not sure. I don't keep up with Mojo Tone kits. I don't know if it's best or worst kit. It's just what amp works well for you. If you want to build a deluxe reverb, their kit would be a good choice. If the deluxe reverb is not the right amp for you, their kit would be a bad choice. So. Hey, Emmett Otter, can I talk a little bit about the Randall mod for Deluxe and Princeton Reverbs? Is it just a mid-boost, Skunky Baxter, etc.? I don't know about the Randall mod. I know that sorry, I'm drawing a blank. We talked about his amps just not long ago. And his name came to my mind very easily not that long ago. Did the Fenders in the 80s. Please, someone help me with this. Has his own amps, which aren't... Rivera, thank you, Dustin. Paul Rivera. Damn. This brain, the pressure of being live, it's weird. I said his name like 8 times early in the stream without any issue. Now that I need it. I know that Paul modded a lot of the stuff at Princeton's and Deluxe's in the studio scene at the time. As far as I know, a lot of what he was doing was he was saying, all right, we're going to give up the reverb channel and use that extra gain stage. And that kind of gets you the same starting point that Randall Smith did with the taking a Princeton and making it into a Boogie Mark I. Same concept is what you start with this 60s Fender Bassman, and you can either turn that into a train wreck or you can turn it into a overdrive special. But I don't know what Paul did specifically, and I don't know if you mean Randall as in Don Randall amps, or Randall Smith. A lot of Skunk Baxter's stuff was all kinds of devices. He had so many pedals. He was the king of little weird gadgets and stuff. And I think most of them were, at least he'd tell me, most of them were provided by the CIA. Hey, Ned. Appreciate it, Ned. Hope you're doing well, Ned. He's got an AB763 with trim removed. Should this affect the tone stack? If the amp doesn't have the blackface chime, it should. Nice vids on early and not early. Thank you. Earl and not Earl. Yeah. If you remove the trim, it won't affect the tone stack. But it depends on how you implement it. You should still have the 100 nanofarad followed by the 50K to ground, and then to the 220K mix resistor, even if you don't have the trim connected. So I don't know, but it shouldn't affect the tone stack at all. Shouldn't affect the sound at all, other than you'd have a bit more gain with the tremolo disconnected. You can. So I think you might have a symptom and think it correlates to the trim being removed, but it's something else. So I'd have to see your amp to know more than that. Sorry. Hey, Yosef, that's a really tricky question. I've got one, and my thoughts are all over the map because whether you can trust the sound coming out of a Tonex to match the real deal, no. you can trust the tone coming out of the Tonex with certain models, not models, but captures. If the person doing the capture captured it properly with the correct levels, and you have the correct levels set up on your Tonex device or your Tonex software, you will be able to accurately sound like that amp did at that moment. But if you turn the mids knob on a Marshall, it doesn't behave the same way as the capture, and then you turn the mids knob on the capture. You'd have to have a separate capture for that amp with the mids turned up. The level issue with the Tonex stuff drives me nuts because they're all over the map. There's no concept of what unity gain is. There's no concept of what the gain on the capture is in relation to the output of pickups. It's very frustrating. I'm very good at this, and it's very hard to keep up with all this stuff and to know. And so you get one provider of captures where they're expecting the gain to be turned up on the guitar, another provider of captures to expect to have the actual output level of the guitar without a big boost first. And so you have to already be really good at this to know whether you're getting good results. That's not a flaw in Tonex so much as Tonex's levels are crazy. Their app sucks, by the way. So before you buy Tonex, if you're gonna buy a tube amp, so you want to know if you've been using Tonex, whether you buy the tube amp, it'll sound like that. That's the other thing, because you're not hearing what the amp sounds like. You're hearing someone's capture of it. And sometimes that's capturing the amp through a speaker, and sometimes that's capturing the amp without a speaker and then using an IR. And so if I do a capture and I'm using a Marshall 4x12 straight cab from 1968 loaded with 1968 pre-roll 20-watt Celestians, and I'm miking it with a U87 and a old SM57 and say I've got a ribbon mic in the room as well, you're not going to hear that out of any amp that you buy unless you happen to have all that same stuff. So if you have been using the Tonex and you tend to like, hey, I like that Vox AC15, or I really like that matchless, or I really like that twin reverb, yes, you will probably like the deluxe reverb. Yes, you will like the twin reverb. Yes, you like the matchless. But don't expect any amp that you have physically in the room to sound like you've got out of the Tonex. And I think if you're going at it purely for amp capturing, I would look into the Neuro stuff as well, at least for playing at home. The neural DSP stuff, I think, is more consistent worldview approach to getting everything, though you can still get bad neural captures as well. Basically, we're all trying to have the sounds that the Fractal gives without spending the Fractal money, and I'm one of those too. So I mean, if you want it done right, you get the Fractal or you buy real amps, and everything in between is don't mess around with Mr. In between. But like most of us, I keep doing it, and I can get musical results. I hope you can too. Magoo says, new to me, AC15C1 has a crackling sound for a second or two when taking off standby. Any idea on cause? Do I need to use standby? It doesn't do it when I don't use standby. Well, the AC15C1, you should use standby because the caps in the preamp section are rated for 350 volts, and you'll have a little bit more than that when the amp first powers on. So I would use the standby. That little bit of crackle could be the output tubes. It's probably nothing to worry about, though. Crackle sometimes happens. Pop can happen. If it gets worse and worse, you probably have a bad output tube. If you don't use a standby, you won't do that because you're not going to. The tubes are going to be able to warm up more slowly that way. And it's not an unreasonable thing for them to have used lower voltage tubes in the preamps. Caps in the preamp section, requiring the need of standby. Because most players have been conditioned to think that standby is a high-end function, a feature It makes an amp more desirable. So for marketing reasons, it makes sense. Oh, by the way, I'm going to have a client show up at some point in the next hour or two, and they're supposed to knock on the door. I've got an amp to give them. So when that knock comes, we'll take an unscheduled intermission. I have to let you guys know these things so I don't say, hey, gotta go, and you're wondering where the hell I've been. Hey, Rick B, got 3 amps, JVM 205C, DSL 40, and the Hot Rod Mike Landau, all less than 2 years old. Would I suggest any upgrades or any of these to keep them dependable? What say you? A great one. I would say sell the Mike Landau before it fails, because it's going to fail. It's going to burn. They have the same problems with the filter caps, same problem with the low voltage supply as every hot rods. It's not going to be a long-term amp. Someone's going to want to buy it because it says Landau. Sell it to them and buy a deluxe reverb reissue. DSL 40 and the JVM 205C, there's not anything you can really do to upgrade them. To keep them reliable, just make sure the input jacks are tight and all the hardware is tight. Make sure the handles are on tight, and take good care of them. The JVM and the DSL 40C, there's not a lot you can do preventatively. They're all right. They are what they are. The hot rod, you could do $300-400 worth of work preventatively and then have an amp which will last a lot longer than it will without that. But you could also say, hey, it's working now. While it still has some resale value, let me get into a better amp. The hot rod, Mike Landau, I don't know why he took that deal with Fender. They must have paid him a shitload. I'm sure he just got used to putting them on his backline, on his rider for backline, and that he could get a sound out of them. It was just easy. He knew that the back stages would have those damn things because they're so common. But I doubt he's recording with them. He probably leaves one at the baked potato, just so he doesn't have to carry it. It's not that important to match schematic voltages of strum bum unless you're off by crazy amounts. If the schematic says I should get 400 volts there and I'm getting 410, I don't worry about it. If the schematic says I'm getting 400 volts there, I'm getting 200 volts, yeah, I worry about it. So I'd say maybe plus minus 15% before you worry about it. If it's, if you don't hear a problem and it's like, hey, it's supposed to be 375, but I'm measuring 390, you're fine. Wall voltages are different than when schematics are measured. And also schematic voltage measurements on old schematics are often listed with a different kind of meter than we use today. And maybe Brad wants to tell you about that because Brad knows more about that than I do in terms of meters that would read X voltage at Y impedance and different voltages at different impedance. You had to have everything set up to get those data sheet results. Hey, Carson Boy, he's got a low 60 hertz hum in his 135 Twin. He's decided his filter caps are DC buildup. Do I have any other suspicions as what it might be? Yeah, you could have ripple in your output, which can be caused by bad filter caps, but it can also be that you don't have well-matched output tubes. So the way output tubes work in a fixed bias push-pull amp is that you've got one set of tubes pushing and then it pulls. So it's you can think of it like pistons, but they're 180 degrees out of phase with each other, right? Well, what they have in common would be any noise, and so you have half the signal here, half the signal here at 180 degrees. The only thing they should have in common would be the background noise, in this case, ripple. And if the tubes are pushing and pulling by the same amount, so like that, in terms of the total arc, then anything they have in common is also 180 degrees out of phase, so it's going to cancel out that hum. But if you have push, but you only have pull, because one tube is weak or one tube is working too hot, then you don't have common mode cancellation. So you're going to hear all that buzz, that hum, in this one because it's not being canceled out by this one. There's a very rough approximation of what's actually happening there, just to give you a visual. So if you don't have well-matched output tubes, even if everything else in your amp is perfect, you can still have hum. Worst case scenario is you have ripple from filter caps, and ripple from bad grounds, and you have ripple from mismatched power tubes. So changing just one of those things won't solve it. you've got to take the holistic approach. What do I think of the Music Man amps? I think they're heavy. They're cool, specific kinds of sounds. I don't think that they're cost-effective these days, but people have always found a use for them. If you run into one and you get a really good deal on it or whatever, and you love the sound, that's great. I wouldn't seek them out myself. Okay, we're to the point where I was playing around with echoey settings. 90s kids all did shrooms because Nintendo. On the 1986, someone had replaced the coupling caps, having snipped out the old ones, and J-hook soldered on the new ones to avoid lifting the board. Is that the heart? It's a PCB with traces underneath. If you've never done it, it can be hard. You want to disconnect all the pots, and you take the knobs off and disconnect all the pots and input jacks from the front panel. And the wires going to the screens node right by the base pot, typically, on the main board. Going to a turret there will need to be disconnected very carefully without the insulation melting. And sometimes you'll need to disconnect same kind of connection to a turret to the bias to flip the board up at that point. Be very careful doing this. Go very slowly. If anything has resistance, stop and find out why. And at that point, what I recommend, and I've shown in the videos, is if this is, let's see. All right, let's see. Say that's the PCB, and you have a resistor that's going like this up top and it's bending over, and that lead's going through. Well, that resistor is also hooked under like this. You know, it's got a J hook, and if you pull it straight up, that hook will rip that pad. So if you have the resistor, I will say here's the resistor here, and here's the body, and here's one lead. I will snip that resistor or that cap right where the lead joins the body, at both ends preferably, or just one, and then from the top, I will very gently straighten the lead up on top of the board, so that if I were looking at it, if say this is the J of the J hook underneath the, this is a bad example, but I don't want to pull up because that will rip up that pad. But then if I apply fresh solder down here, I can push this whole thing down, and then the J hook, the bent over section, is free from the board. I can snip that off, and the whole thing just falls off in either direction. And then very carefully, I can remove that excess old solder, clean up any old dirt and flux, and then recreate that. But you don't want to pull a bent lead through the pad or the trace on the bottom of the board, because it's a pretty fragile one-sided board without a lot of copper, and it's really easy to mess them up. So if you try it and you have any issues, stop, because you can do a lot of damage. Look at the 76 I've got on the channel where someone had just butchered the whole thing. I had to replace the entire board. But careful work can do it. Jason Weidner, let me know next time, man. I'd be glad to do that for you. Let's see. I have not interacted with the Lexicon Signature 284 This Perfect World. I remember those from back in the day. Those things were sold. Those were sold as like the ideal situation to match with like your Eventide Eclipse and a whole bunch of stuff. No, it's a nice little amp. Have you had a real tube amp experience playing yours? I cannot tell you that. I mean, on paper, yes, you absolutely have. It is an amplifier that uses tube. You've had a real tube amp experience. As I recall, they had a very specific sound, but I haven't even heard one in forever. So it was a great idea. Though, of course, it's insane for me to suggest that you'd use it with an Eventide Eclipse. Lexicon would much prefer to use it with a Lexicon thing. Ah, the days of racks. The days of racks and roses. It's hard to say racks and roses. Have you tried it? Can you do it without sounding like Scooby-Doo? Racks and roses. That's terrible, Scooby-Doo. Racks and roses. My kids always liked that. They thought it was great. When a little Yoda, really. The kids like Yoda, though. Let's see. Is it worth buying a Marshall SV20H? No, Jazz Bass, it is not. Well, get the SV20H better than the Origin, but don't buy either. For the same price, you can get a used Friedman or many other things that'd be better. I mean, I take the AC15 C1 and an overdrive pedal over any of those Marshalls, and you'd have enough leftover change to buy a guitar as well. Hey, Drop D tuned. His trainer YGL1 is gaining volume and distortion after some 15 minutes of warming up and playing. What could be causing this? Thanks for your channel. It's probably a solder joint, which isn't great. Maybe the ground connection on a pot is coming loose, or connection in a voltage divider. So some voltage which is being divided, a signal which is being attenuated when the amp is cold, is no longer having that attenuation as the amp gets hot. That's what I would look at, but I would have to have your amp on the bench to tell you more than that. You can probably find it with the chopstick if you're very careful, though. Is Brad vulgar or just Australian? Well, that's a tricky issue. That's a tricky question, isn't it? It's so hard to tell the difference. See a magisterium. Where's the duck? The duck's right here. The duck's always watching. Duck's always watching. He's here in case we need them. All right, we're going to take the second 7-minute intermission, and I'll see you guys in just a few. Thank you. All right. Here we is. We's back. And I don't know why. It's going to drive me nuts if it keeps telling me that system audio is muted. I know system audio is muted. I want system audio muted. Not all software updates are our friend. Let's see, where were we? Wiener Schnitzel to you too, Scott Christ, and Gesundheit. I have to say, when I was in Vienna, I tried the original Wiener Schnitzel at Nugern's place. I don't remember the original place. It was touted as the place where it was invented. It was a beautiful location down this little alley next to Mozart's house. And in fact, on that same alley, while we were waiting in line, we found what became my wife's wedding ring, which is an opal set on a white gold band I bought for her while we were in Vienna, right down from Mozart's house. Romance tip for you guys. Anyway, the Wiener Schnitzel was very boring. I was disappointed. They need to come to the South, and I'll show you how to do country fried steak. Just the Wiener Schnitzel needed something beyond lemon to be flavorful. But the Stelze is phenomenal, and I'm a lifelong fan of the Kaiserkrane. Kaiserkrane is my friend. Hey, Sadeki, I replace all diodes and resistors on the bias boards and rectification boards of old Fenders because I've seen those old diodes begin to fail, and just while I'm in the neighborhood, yeah, A1 and 4007s, they're fine, more than fine. Resistors, I like the 2-watt Vichy metal films because I like them, but for those things, you can just use half-watt carbon films to be absolutely fine. And that's interesting. Sadaki has a 71 basement 10, and the next question is from DK about a 72 basement 10. New F&T caps and 18 and Mason tubes and Jensen Falcon speakers. Can I suggest any quality of life upgrades? Pardon me. I wouldn't make too many changes to it. Just make sure it's all clean and working properly. And if it sounds good to you, that's the sound of that amp. I think it should be... that amp should be what it is. And if you want it to be something else, then sell it to someone who wants that sound and find something closer already to what you're looking for. But they're good amps. So you have suggested replies when you comment on videos too, Tom. Yeah, the AI thing is crazy. I don't have any thoughts on the build quality of Milkman amps, Kyle, because I have not had a Milkman on the bench or seen inside one. I know that some of the stuff they do is solid state, some of the stuff they do is tube. I don't know which models are which. I hope that they're great. They have a good reputation. Maybe I'll do a video, Max Powers, where I actually go through my comment section and tell you guys what it thinks I should be replying to you guys, because it's just crazy. It's just insane. And what's weird is they're almost good. Obviously, they have been watching my channel. But getting things slightly wrong. It's almost what I would say if I had just had a minor stroke. What, if any, multi-channel amp with MIDI switching would I recommend quality-wise? Hey, Timothy, I think the Sur PT100 is the way to go on that. Another option would be the Head First, Alta. I believe he has MIDI switching, and I think that... some of the George's Metropolis amps have that. I'm not sure if he's incorporated MIDI into that. MIDI is not very widespread amongst guitarists these days, but I would certainly say that the Sur and the Head First would be my recommendations. Is a 64 hand-wired worth sending in for customization to a local guy, or is it garbage from the beginning? It depends. First of all, it depends on your local guy or gal and whether they know what they're doing. But on that note, I've got a 64, I don't remember if it's hand-wired Princeton or Deluxe Reverb coming in this week from a client in New Orleans. So you guys will see me going through and improving one. I think it's a Deluxe Reverb. So I'll be showing my changes to a 64 hand-wired in the next week or so. So hold off on that. Let's see if you agree with me. Hey, Dell, he's wants a speaker replacement for a 68 custom Vibrochamp. I believe the 68 custom Vibrochamp uses a 10 or an 8. If it uses a 10, then the G10C would be fantastic. If it uses an 8, then the G8C would be fantastic. But yeah, the 68 custom Vibrochamp's a pretty good amp. It's a shame that the reverb is digital and won't last very long, but there's pedals and it works without the reverb working, so that's good. The rest of the amp is quite nice. The stock speaker was not fantastic in my experience, and I think I did put a G10C into that one, but it's been a while, I don't recall. The G10C and the ET10 are both great recommendations. And Gooden's telling us all about his shroom knowledge. The 70s were a hell of a time, huh? Let's see. Hey, Thanasis, at what knob intensity should you start noticing the vibrato on a Fender Deluxe Reverb reissue? Thanks for your videos. Thank you. Great channel. Great country. Greetings from the Greece. I'd love to go to Greece someday. Everyone else will be looking at Thessaloniki, and I'd be looking at what used to be the volcano there that caused the 12th century collapse of the Mediterranean culture. I'm such a geek. But yeah, I've always wanted to go to Greece. Back to your question, sorry. It's going to depend on the taper of the pot, but generally you'll start to notice it about 3, but it's going to be real subtle. And by 4.5, it should be much more audible, but not deep until you get to like 6, and then from 6 to 10 it gets deep. That's in general. If you, pardon me, my nose is itching. I don't mean to be gross for you guys. Just a second. In general, if your tremolo seems weak, first thing to do is to change out the tremolo tube in the Deluxe Reverb reissue, and most Fenders from that era, or of that era in terms of the reissues, it's V5. On a Princeton, it's, I believe, V3. RO, I'm glad you were able to get Mesa to fix your old triple rectifier. Good luck to the repair. They don't always fix them the way I would fix them. I've seen Mesa factory repairs that come back kind of band-aided. I hope that's not the case. Hey, Max Powers, any preference of treble bleed circuit for HHS Strats, 500K volume pots? I don't like treble bleeds. I do essentially what people with Les Pauls call the 50s mod. I connect the tone stack to the wiper of the volume pot rather than the input of the volume pot, and then you don't need a treble bleed circuit. I find it much more musical, and that'll certainly work with the HSS Strat with 500K pots. So look up the 50 circuit for Les Pauls, and it shows how to do that. And if you're able to wire a guitar, you just move the tone connection, the tone stack connection from the input to the wiper of the volume pot, and you don't need to have a treble bleed. If you absolutely needed to have a treble bleed beyond that point, I would try the SUR one. I think it's like 180 K in series with a 820 picofarad, something like that. Might be misremembering one or both of those numbers. I haven't looked at that in a while. But the SUR is not a bad circuit. Hey, sent to me. He's got a PS100, and the rear jacks support the TS inputs are plastic, and the one on effects return is missing. And written email crickets. Could I call Dave and get part? PS100 is that a Friedman? I'm not sure what you're asking. So you're missing a nut. You're missing a nut or missing a jack. I can get you the part number for either. It depends on. Can you reword this more clearly and tell me exactly what if it's just the nut, if it's the jack that's broken off, if it's the nut that's missing, whether if it has a plastic nose or plastic threads or metal threads, or whether it's just a hole where the thing used to be. We can get you taken care of. But what is the PS100? Arnold, don't buy a 64 hand-wired Princeton Reverb or a Tone King Imperial Mark II unless it's one of the old Tone Kings actually made before the takeover by BAD, especially if you want to keep it forever. Find a early 70s Princeton Reverb or 60s Princeton Reverb and have it brought back to as new condition, and then you'll have a forever amp in that price range, or Deluxe Reverb or Vibrolex Reverb. But the Tone Kings, I'm not that impressed with. The modern ones, the old ones that Mark made were fantastic, but the current ones, they're all right. And the hand-wired Princeton Reverb is not worth anything what Fender charges for it. There's so many other ways to get a Princeton built for you these days that are better. I would not spend money on either the Fender or the Tone King. RJ Electric says the new modded Marshall Plexi has a pre-tone stack master volume rather than a post-phase inverter. What do I think is the rationale for that? There are some mods, Jose and others, where they added so much gain to the stuff that the EQ section, the tone stack, did not make much difference. But by putting the master volume before the tone stack, it brought the levels down where you could actually hear the differences. I think it's a copy of a Band-Aid rather than an actual design. I'm not a big fan of it, but if you like the sound of it, that's great. But again, rather than buying a new modded Marshall or a new modded Marshall anything, call Dave Friedman, go to his website, see what he's got. Odds are he's doing it better, faster, smarter, more powerful. Whew. Sully says, got a PV trans tube that keeps blowing fuses, a solid state with a floating rail set up. The board is burned on the negative of one of the 4700 microfarad filter caps. Any help? Yeah. If the amp has enough resale value to support $200 to $300 worth of repair work on it, take it to a tech. If not, get a different amp. I don't know what the value of a trans tube is, but once the board is burned, that's the one you can see. Odds are it's the tip of a smelly iceberg, and don't let it turn into a money pit. Is getting a good power amp like a Fryette, then trying different tube preamps a decent way to approach tone chasing? Well, it's an expensive way. I imagine that if you were playing around in that price range, you could go to a really good dealer and say, hey, I want to hear this preamp into this power amp. My client's here to pick up that amp. I'll be right back. Sorry about that, but you know, the purpose of this is the clients, not me. So we were talking about, yeah, it's. I would say go to a really nice dealer and say, hey, I want to hear this preamp with this power amp and this preamp with this power amp, because if you're going to be spending the kind of money that rack setups involve these days, someone's going to want to make that sale, and they're going to drag stuff out and hook it up for you. So it's a fine way, but make sure that you've played standalone amps as well, so you have a good base of comparison. Let's see. Connecting two amps to the same speaker at once is problematic, right? Even if only one amp is switched on. Yeah, you don't want to have that happen. You do not want to have any connection of the output sections of those two amps at any time. Yeah, Exolite's probably what I'm going to get. I don't know about self-adjusting, but I need to get some new strippers. As much as I strip wire, there's no excuse for me not to spend the money as long as I'm getting an actual thing. Would busted tips on the test leads cause a multimeter to not work? Probably. I've not tried that, but yeah, you know, how would if you don't have tips on your leads, it'd be really difficult for the multimeter to measure anything. So I don't know whether I imagine the multimeter is probably fine. You just need some new leads. James, that's great to hear. I'm glad that's working for you. What the hell is a Jose mod? It's a bunch of mods done in the 80s to Marshalls on the LA studio scene for more gain, and you could hear that on Rat Records and Dokken Records and Billy Idol Records and all that stuff, because all of a sudden people wanted more gain than the traditional Marshall had. And it was, you know, look it up. It's a thing. Jose was not the only one doing it, but certainly one of the more prominent guys. Hey, music nerd. He never uses extension speaker jack on his Princeton. Seen some people do mods, add a mids control pot or master volume knob in that spot. What is most useful mod, in my opinion? Mids pot. You don't really need a master volume with the Princeton, but a mids pot can really make the amp very useful. I like an 100K audio taper pot there for the mids. That way, from 1 to 5.5, you know, from 0 to halfway up, you've got the traditional range of a twin. And so about 10 o'clock would be stock on the Princeton. And above noon, you get into more mids until eventually the tone stacks mostly bypass. You get more gain. You can get kind of tweedy sounds out of it for the cost of a $2 pot that fits in the, you know, with a $1.50 knob that fits in an existing 3/8 inch hole where the extension jack used to be. You can always put the extension jack in a box and keep it around if you ever want to go back, and just running, lifting the 6.8K resistor from the bass pot and running a wire, a shielded cable both to ground and to that lug 1 of that bass pot, and going to the lugs 2 and 3. That's our 1 and 2 of the mids pot, and all of a sudden you've got a really versatile, useful mod. Thank you, Victor. That's very kind of you. I'm Victor's number 1. So mahalo, Victor. Am I still going to release a Korg SED3K preamp soon? If so, when and where can I pre-order? Well, you're about 15 years late. I came up with that preamp 15, 20 years ago. It's called the Triad, and I was making it for a long time, but the costume manufacturer just got out of control, and everything started moving overseas, and I just couldn't afford to scale up to that. And I was spending way too much time soldering things on my kitchen table. But yeah, the Sonic Audio Triad is still out there, and it's a good sounding SED 3000 preamp, but I don't think I'll be getting back into that particular world. Is a HX Stomp used under $500 these days a decent investment for novice tone chasing? Absolutely, it is. I've got one right here, and I use it all the time. Mostly if I want to add reverb or tremolo to an amp, but I can always use it as a standalone thing, and I've gotten good sounds out of it, and I've gotten good sounds out of the Tonex. I mean, it doesn't matter if the HX Stomp is 5 years old or however old it is compared to whatever whiz-bang thing comes out next. From my perspective, when I compare the HX Stomp to what I started out with, like a Gorilla amp, or what most people of my generation or older started out with, which is a terrible sounding thing, it's amazing everything you can get in the HX Stomp. You can actually sound like a record from day one. And whether you can play at all is up to you. But and the more you learn about it, the more you can use your imagination. I think it's great if you're serious about playing guitar, and that's your first tool, that's your first toy. Man, you can go in so many different directions. I mean, you can get pretty close to a vintage sound for practice, and you can get sounds that you could never get out of an amp. I think it's a wonderful thing. It doesn't matter if it's approaching obsolescence. The Tonex software is so dreadful. Stephen Kastner agrees with me. It's a useful item to have, man, and they make it so hard to get good results, and even sometimes to know why you got good results. Eckhart Krauss says he owns the export version of a Twin Reverb reissue. What's the function of the 10-amp fuse in the heater circuit, which doesn't exist in the U.S. schematics? Well, Europe expects every secondary to be fused, so that's the HT, and in a Twin, it'd be the HT secondary and the heater secondary. The trouble with the heater secondary is that under normal operation, say that the heaters draw 6 amps. When all the tubes in the amp together are working, you're going to expect 6 amps to be there. So you put a 6.3 amp fuse in. Well, at the moment you start up, there's an inrush of current which would blow a heater fuse. So then you put in a 10 amp fuse, so that won't happen. And that's pretty much a way for them to appease the EU regulators. Let's put a 10 amp fuse in there. I imagine it probably used to be like 8 amp or 6.3 amps. Heaters should never be fused if you can avoid it, because that inrush current is really tricky. Because if you get it so that the fuse value is high enough that the inrush current doesn't trip the fuse, then if you have the beginnings of a failure in your heater supply, you've already potentially done damage before the fuse will trip, because say that you put in a 10 amp fuse and you should have 3 amps normally, but you've got 5 amps. Well, that's excess heat, but it's not going to trip the fuse, so it's not really giving protection. But if you try to set the fuse so you really will get protection, you're also going to get a lot of false failures. But anyway, to satisfy the EU regulators, they slapped a fuse on the heater secondary. 10 amp should pretty much never fail. It's pretty much just something for regulators that doesn't do anything. It is a potential point of failure, but won't hurt the sound of the amp. So it's one of those things because of a bureaucrat. Why in reactive loads that also function as attenuators, like the Fryette power station, there is a full power amp included? Why not use restive energy to amp to drive speakers? That's not how attenuation works in terms of energy, the way you think about it. Let's see. The rest energy of the amp to drive. I'm not quite sure what you're asking, but it seems like you're expecting that the power stolen by attenuation could be used to power something else. That's anytime you turn current or voltage into something else, it's a lossy thing. So it's not efficient. So it's not like you can say, well, I had the potential for X current, all I need Y current, so all the difference can be transferred into some other form of energy at a 1-to-1 ratio. You're losing so much to heat. So horses for courses. Maybe if you rephrase that, I can give you a better answer. Hey, good at guitars. Yeah, tubes can test fine, but still fail. Most tube testers only run at 200 to 300 volts DC. And an amp, you're going to have like 450 volts DC. And an amp, you're going to have current demands that a tube tester doesn't have. A tube tester is not necessarily going to say, give you an indication whether something's microphonic or whether you're going to have an intermittent connection on a pin. I see lots of tubes that pass tests that fail in an amp. I have never seen an amp which passes a tube that fails a tube tester, but then works. So a tube tester will get rid of 90% or more of bad tubes, but there are bad tubes that a tube tester cannot predict. So I don't use a tube tester. If I have say someone brings in 6 CA7s or KT88s, and I need to get 2 more. I will take the tubes I have to Tube Depot and have them match them and send me a new pair of tubes to make a matched quad or double quad or whatever. So I'll use them for that. But the rest of the time, I have an amp that I know works. I'll put in tubes with a current limiter, and if the current limiter doesn't light up, I know those tubes are working, and then I know that if they're safe at that point. The best tube tester really is an amplifier, but you don't want to put something with a dead short in an amplifier. Hey, music nerd. Yeah, the AC15C1 comes with a greenback. The AC15C1X comes with the Celestian blue, and the AC15C1X costs more because the blue is more expensive. I do like the sound with the greenback, not as well as I like with the blue, but I do like the greenback. What is my favorite speaker for a Vox? I like both those speakers. I like the Vintage 30. I like the ET65 an awful lot, and I like the black and blue that WGS makes. I think the Reaper is a really nice sounding speaker that WGS makes. The old Eminence Red Coat, what was it called? They had their version. They had their Eminence Red version of an AC of a Celestian blue. That was a good speaker, and then Scumbag's got some nice ones. But yeah, the C1 comes with the greenback. C1X comes with the blue. And so you paid less for your C1 than you would for a C1X. So it's a good sound. If it doesn't hurt, don't worry about it. But if you want to play around with some other speakers, play around with some other speakers. I've got a few different ones on the channel. If you look at my Vox playlist, you're going to hear all kinds of speakers with them. And the only thing in common is that by the time I release the video, they sound pretty good. Hey, Rock and Chair Boogie. I'd be glad to look at an Avalon U5 for you. That's something that's small enough that it wouldn't interrupt the bench schedule. Shoot me an email and we'll discuss. On the 72 basement 10, what's the point of master volume in the grand scheme? Well, if you want to turn the preamp up, you can then keep the overall level down. If you're just playing the amp clean, I don't think it really does that much for you. But, there's nothing wrong with using the master volume on that amp. But in general, I tend to treat them, unless I'm going for something where I'm really turning the preamp up to do like a Mike Bloomfield kind of thing, I tend to just treat them like they're non-master volume Fenders. Should you be using standby? If the amp has got a tube rectifier, don't use standby. This is for Fenders. If the amp has got a tube rectifier, don't use standby. If the amp is solid state rectified, use standby. That's not the same for all amps out there, but that's the case for Fenders. Hey, Eckert. His twin uses a 10K pot for bias setting, but even the highest setting offers too low a current value. What's to do? Well, you need to decrease the resistor going to ground. From lug 1 of that pot to ground is going to be a resistor. For instance, on the 65 twin it featured yesterday, or the day before yesterday, I changed the 27K to a 15K, which lets the bias range get hotter. And so it's the same thing. I think you got a 27K in yours. So identify that resistor going from the bias pot to ground and decrease its value. You can do that by changing the resistor or putting a different resistor across it in parallel. If you're not familiar with it, you can look up parallel resistor calculator to say, all right, I've got a 27K. I want to get it to 20K. Oh, if I put this 82K across it or 100K, that gets me pretty close to 20K. That's top of my head. I'd have to do the math. But that's the resistor. If you decrease that resistor, your overall bias will get warmer. If you increase that resistor, your overall bias range will get cooler. You'll still have fine control with the pot. But say right now your bias trim pot turned all the way to its hottest setting, you can't get over 52% dissipation. You change that 27K to a 15K, then all of a sudden you could get up to 70% dissipation. Hey Wes, what is the Panasonic cap model that I'm using to replace those terrible Mesa Orange drops? I have one that's leaking 14.5 volts. I'm humming like it doesn't know the words. Exactly. Go to Mauser.com. You want the Panasonic ECQ series, and you want polyester, 630 volts, straight leads, not kinked, straight. And then you find the large of the ones that come up. Once you put in the value, that's probably going to be 47 nanofarad. 90% of the caps in a Mesa are 47 nanofarad. Then you choose the one with the larger lead spacing. You don't want to put a 5 millimeter lead spacing cap in there because you're going to go this way. So see if you can find a 10, 15, 18 millimeter lead spacing version of that cap because they've got lots of different ones. You're probably going to pay about $1.50 per cap, and it's totally worth it. Our Carvin's good. He's got a line of Vi Legacy 2 120 watt combo with stock mercury magnetics iron. No, Carvin's are not built well. The Vi Legacy stuff is maybe the best of a bad bunch, but it's really not worth it. It's not built well. I respect Steve Vai, but I don't think that that amp. I can't imagine he went on tour with stock Legacy 2s. Remember, the guys like that have a guy like me. So there's the amp that's got his name on it. He's going to go on a world tour. He's going to have his guy go through it. And a lot of the stuff that was probably done before he hit those tours was done. And you would also probably tour with 3 of them to have a spare for the spare. For the rest of the people out there who can't have the amp rebuilt for them or have 3 versions of it, I don't think it's a good bet. What's the best new 6v6 on the market? Big Boss asks. This week, and maybe this week only, I'm finding good results with the Electro Harmonix 6v6, but that's through Tube Depot. Other vendors might have something else. I don't know. It's so hard to keep up with what tubes are good, what tubes are bad. They keep alternating. But right now, I'm having good luck with the Electro Harmonix 6v6. What's the best small tube amp? I'm old and need a lighter tube amp. I'm gigging with a Tone Master Blonde pretty good, but us guitar players never satisfy. Well, David, if you're liking the Tone Master Blonde, then you're liking it. The problem I had with the Tone Master, and I've only tried the Deluxe Reverb, was that if I played really hard, it was very compressed and squashed and had no headroom. If I played soft and clean stuff, it was really pretty. And if that's what you need the amp to do, it does a great job of that. But I have reliability concerns about the Tone Masters. But for the things it does right, it does them really, really right, and the reverb on those things sounds great. And it's very, it's portable, it's light. I would say, what is the best small tube amp? There are 2, as far as being the best and small. 3, really, because there's an overlap. Of the least expensive stuff on the market, a used 65 reissue Princeton Reverb or a used 65 reissue Deluxe Reverb are going to give you pretty good representations of two of the best sounding amps ever made. The stock speakers typically suck. So look at maybe $800 to $900 for the used version and then another $100 or so for a better speaker. Or you can buy a used Vox AC15C1, which sounds phenomenal. It's only going to be like $450, $500. You don't need to change the speaker, but it's really heavy. If you're having bad back issues, you do not want that amp. So the Princeton would probably be your best bet. But, you know, the Princeton still is a lot heavier than the Tone Master. So if you like the Tone Master and it doesn't die, use the Tone Master. It doesn't have to have tubes. It has to make music. So whatever makes music for you, man. Thanks, Jazz Bass. I appreciate that. That's very kind. Yeah, it does look like the wrong trousers duck. Yeah, it might be that someone took that and then just subtly, very subtly made some changes. But it's very, very much Ardman. I love the Wallace and Gromit stuff. The wrong trousers, and the attack of the were-rabbit. Let's see. The odds of being flipped off by a duck are very low, but never zero. That's right. That's why you come to this channel. We can learn so much together. Tube amps are the claymation of the music industry. I can see that. Let's see. Thanks to This Perfect World. That's very kind. Let's see. I've not seen a Dumble NAM video. I mean, Howard Alexander is no longer with us, so I don't know who or what would be making something called Dumble these days. Hey, Adam. Thank you very much. Look at all the various amps on my channel when I rebuild the old Fenders or the amps when I've built new versions of Fenders. You'll see specific instances of resistor and capacitor types and brands in all those videos. I can't go through the whole list here, but I literally have done that over 1,000 times now. So in general, you won't go too far wrong with Vishay. Got to go for a Ram Schnitzel. I have to look up what a Ram Schnitzel is. What do I think of the Fender Deluxe Reverb Tone Master? Well, I think I just answered that. For some playing styles, it's fine. For harder hitting bluesy styles, or if you wanted to do some rock and roll kind of stuff, I think it's too squashed. It's like it's got a built-in compressor in it. And I really don't expect they're going to last very long. I think they're going to be landfill, which is a shame. Hey, Raphael. Thanks for joining us. Any recommendations on brand for 6CA7 power tube? No. If I had an amp with that needed 6CA7s, I would go to Tube Depot or the Tube Store and see what they had in stock. Or I'd also talk to the owner about whether they want to pay for something that says 6CA7 versus just using EL34s. But I don't know what's good or bad on the market right now, or even what's available right now. Not a lot of 6CA7s out there. Oh, with a creamy mushroom bacon sauce. Yeah, I've had that. Yeah, Schnitzel and Spätzle with gravy is a different thing than Schnitzel by itself, especially with that weird, slightly sweet potato salad. Was not a big fan. Thanks, Joe. Are there other ways to take the fizz out of a DSL 40C other than clipping C19? Well, yes, but I would not expect. I would not go looking to make big changes to the DSL series If it does what you want it to do, that's great. If it doesn't, there are other amps out there, because they're going to intrinsically have a limited resale value. And if you make changes, that resale value can plummet, because people don't want to hear, oh, he changed a bunch of parts to make it sound better. They're going to hear it's not original. I want to find one that's original, because people believe that Marshall, the logo, has some magic to it. So I don't think it's a good return on your investment. David Seal just bought a Stereotone JCM 51. Anything I should be cautious of, or upgrade improvements? I don't know that model. The Stereotones that have come in, the concerns I've had have been things like switches being poor quality, IEC connectors being of poor quality, and any capacitor which has that orange Stereotone plastic sleeving. I don't know what capacitor is underneath that. I wouldn't change them on site, but I would not be surprised if down the road I needed to replace those. But input jack, some switches, I've had some really iffy quality from them. Other things in those amps have been fantastic. My only real concern about Stereotone is the long-term reliability of those very generic-looking transformers with very sharp corners, which don't promote the concept of quality to me. I have not had any direct experience with them failing, but I have heard from other techs that it is not uncommon to have failures for there. That's right, good. And Santorini was a huge volcanic explosion, but the tidal wave probably wiped out not just the Mycenaean, not just the culture on Knossos and Crete, but also Mycenaean culture, had ramifications for the entire Mediterranean. It just, take that, and then you add in the sea peoples, and it was a bad time to be doing business there. And now you just can't find a place to stay. Thanks, Goody Guitars. Appreciate it. Thank you. I've not tried the Synergy preamp modules, Stephen. If you like the Zerek and Tone King Imperial Mark II modules, that's great. I've not tried the whole setup. I know some of the guys involved in Synergy, like Bruce and Dave, and I have high expectations, but I've not tried them. The amps I try are the amps that come in because people need work on them and no one has brought one in. That could be because they never fail, or no one around here has one. So, or if they fail, they would go to one of those guys, though I've done some warranty work for some of those guys before. I would expect them to be good. All right, Fryette PS100 is kind of plastic, snap-in support that mimics the nut and supports the TS input for the FX return. Thank you. All right, sent to me. I've had a hard time getting in touch with Steve Fryette as well. Get in touch with Dave Friedman. I know he knows Steve and might have like the bat phone. A plastic snap-in support that mimics the nut and supports the TS input. I'm not sure what that is, and I don't. I think I had a PS100 on the channel not long ago. I'll look through that video after this and see if I find anything. If I find anything, I'll pop it in the comments on this stream after it's done. But contact Dave Friedman and see if he can hook you up, because he'll probably have dealt with enough of them to know, or he can maybe Steve will answer the phone if Dave calls. Hey, Splat Records, why does my 67 Twin make a sharp pop when plugging in? Two possible reasons. Number one, when the amp doesn't have a plug in it, the jack should have two pieces of metal making contact with each other. And the one is the piece of metal connected to where the tip of the jack goes. The other one is going to be shunting that to ground. And if that connection gets dirty, you can have pops. The other thing is, from the tip to ground should be a 1 meg resistor in that amp. And if that 1 meg resistor fails, then at the moment of switching, at the moment of opening or closing that, then there's no ground reference to the grid of V1A or V2 2A. So for the moment that you're plugging a guitar in or unplugging a guitar, for that split second, there's no ground reference. That tube doesn't bias correctly. And that can happen if that 1 meg resistor fails. Sometimes you'll have both those things. It can also just be a bad solder joint causing the same effect. In normal operation, if you're not plugged into the amp, then it's at ground. If you are plugged into the amp, that 1 meg is in parallel with your pickups. So your pickups are like, say they're 6K, in parallel with 250K volume pot, so that's going to be like 5.2K, and then in parallel with 1 meg, so like 5K. So when you're operating, that's the load on the input. But for that split second of plugging and unplugging, it should go between ground and 1 meg and 5K. But if that 1 meg is not operating, then you're going to go between ground, no ground reference, and 5K ground reference, and that's when you're going to get that big pop. So make sure that your input jacks are clean. And make sure that if you plug a dummy cable in, but nothing at the other side, you measure 1 meg from tip to ground. And if you don't measure 1 meg from tip to ground, then you've got a problem with that resistor or a problem with the solder joint. Any budget multimeters I recommend? Yeah, Kyle, I use these cheap ones, and they're in the description of all my videos. I don't remember the brand or model number, but they're like $20 on Amazon, and you can find that in the description of all my videos. And I've got like 3. They do everything for me that the Flukes used to do, only that they didn't cost $300 and they didn't die. So, thank you, sent to me. I'll look that up, and I'll see if I can get in touch with Stephen. We'll get to this. Hey, Dean McCaskill, if you got a blue for your AC-15, it's not risky to change it. You're not going to come in contact with any voltage. You don't have to have your hands in your pockets or rubber gloves as well. You'll want to remove the chassis to access the speaker fully. Here's what you do. You take your AC-15, have it all hooked up normally. Take the rear panel off. Have it on. Get sound. Play for a bit. Have someone unplug it from the wall and immediately strum really hard until the sound completely fades out, then strum for another 30 seconds. At that point, take all the lay the amp face up on a carpet or something. Take the 4 screws off the sides, 2 on each side, and the chassis will slide out. You already removed the rear panel from this instance. And very carefully, you can then tilt the cabinet up and disconnect the speaker wire. You can disconnect the speaker wires first, I guess, and then you have access to change out the speaker. Then you put it back. You don't ever have to put your fingers inside the amp to do this. You can discharge it first, the way I just told you, to be safe. You don't remember. This was on. You were getting sound out of the amp. You didn't turn it off. You didn't put it in standby. You unplugged it from the wall and played. And what you hear, from the moment you unplugged it from the wall and you played, what you're hearing, what's making the sound come through, is the DC that was stored in those caps being used to make that sound, and it drops down till it's not enough for you to hear anything. And you keep playing another 30 seconds. It's going to be down to like 2 volts. No big deal. Hey, Brews and Ale. I have no direct experience with the Pink Taco, but I'm sure that they're just fine. Dave's not going to put something on the market that's bad, but I don't have any direct experience with the Pink Taco. So that is just, that is an assumption on my part, but it's an assumption that I would put money on. Do I have any tips for cleaning super filthy Tolex? Tried using dish soap and water, diluted isoalcohol, and Music Nomad Tolex cleaner. Still has brown grime in the Tolex grooves. Well, yeah. The first thing I would do is on the bottom. So if there is any reaction, though I can't imagine there would be, I would take a bit of naphtha, also known as lighter fluid, but if you buy it called naphtha at the hardware store, it costs less, and an old soft bristle toothbrush. And I would put like a dime-sized drop of naphtha in that area and let it sit for a minute. And if I don't see any weirdness change to the Tolex pattern there, I would go in there and use the soft bristle brush and work down into those grooves, and then take some warm water and on a rag and clean up any remaining naphtha at that point and let it dry for a minute. Take a look at it. Notice I'm saying naphtha, definitely not acetone. Naphtha will get almost anything off most things. But if you have any reaction to that, then go back to the dish soap and warm water and a soft bristle toothbrush, and you will get that stuff out in time. We're coming up at the very end of today, so I'm going to scroll down, make sure because I got some super chats I want to catch before we end. And to everyone whose question I did not get to this time, we'll have to do this again soon. And I want to mention again that, thanks, Greg G., that we're going to be, after I end in about 4 minutes, Brad's stream is going to start at Brad's Guitar Garage. Brad, put your link up on the screen for people to click on right after this, because he's always a good time, and he's also a good bunch of guys. Now I want pork schnitzel with mushroom sauce, only with also using salt and pepper and maybe some cayenne or something. Thank you very much, John C. I appreciate that. Any books I recommend for a novice? I get asked this an awful lot. Go to valvewizard.co.uk. That is Merlin Blinco's excellent site. He has some really good articles on there. He's got links. He's got an entire chapter of one of his books on there, and he's got links to buy his books. I'd also recommend if you're a bit more advanced at math, get the Radio Designer's Handbook Volume 4, which is out there in free PDF version, or the Jack Dar books. But Valve Wizards are a really good place. By the time you've learned everything he's taught you and really thought about it and done the homework, then you'd be either ready to go farther, or you'd say, this is much more math than I expected. I'm not going to do that. Let's see. I think we're right here at the end. Yeah. So, all right, we're going to sign off now, and then I'll be joining everyone soon at Brad's, because it's nice to be able to observe this thing and not have to be the guy talking the whole time. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. It means a lot. I appreciate each and every one of you except for you, and you know who you are. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. I appreciate each and every one of you except for you, and you know who you are. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. I appreciate each and every one of you except for you. Forgot to hit end broadcast.